So, welcome to LiberalViewer Wednesday Live. I'm glad to see people joining and getting ready to ask questions. LiberalViewer Wednesday Live is the live event I put up on YouTube at 4:30 p.m. on Pacific on Wednesdays, where I answer my viewers' questions live, and then for about half an hour, and then it goes up onto the internet as a recorded video. And in case anyone didn't notice, after I finish these events, I've been putting time index into the video, so you can go through and look at the part of the video, the topics that I answer that interest you. This week I had one question asked during the week for me to answer before I get to the live viewer questions. And it comes from Terry Alther, who, as I say, is one of my more loyal questioners or viewers for Liberal Viewer Wednesday Live. It's a question for Wednesday. I read this op-ed about a kid going to jail because he refused to change or turn around his t-shirt, which was a pro-NRA t-shirt with an assault rifle. And I was wondering what your and the ACLU stance is on this, especially since you made 2 videos about the free speech of t-shirts in schools. And you can see there are links in his question to the video I made, Fox News anti-Islam t-shirt story unfairly attacks ACLU. And that was a case from Florida where the ACLU of Florida defended these right-wing Christian kids who wore Islam is of the devil t-shirts to school. And then the second case was actually from Northern California, where I am. The ACLU of Northern California wrote a letter in support of these kids who wore American flag t-shirts on Cinco de Mayo to their school. And they got in trouble with the school because they thought that the school official said that was provocative. And one interesting thing about that, the legal standard on that first comes from an ACLU case that the Supreme Court decided, Tinker versus Des Moines, Iowa. And that was a case in which a bunch of public school students during the Vietnam War wanted to wear these black armbands that protesting the Vietnam War. And they got in trouble for that in the Supreme Court. This was the Supreme Court case. Excuse me. I've kind of had a cold lately. This was the Supreme Court case in which the Supreme Court said that students don't shed their First Amendment rights at the schoolhouse gate, that they do have some First Amendment rights at school. And in that case, because they were just wearing black armbands and weren't disrupting the educational environment or weren't disrupting other kids from getting an education, the Supreme Court said they did have First Amendment rights to wear those black armbands in school. And that's the standard. There's been some subsequent cases that say kids can't engage in indecent speech. And but one interesting thing about the kids who wore the American flag t-shirts on Cinco de Mayo, the federal district court judge in that case, I should probably switch over so you can see me when I'm talking here. The federal district court judge in that case actually found for summary judgment in favor of the school district, saying that there was enough evidence that those t-shirts would have disrupted the educational environment. There were like threats of violence from wearing American flag t-shirts on Cinco de Mayo, and so the school officials were justified in banning those American flag t-shirts, despite what the ACLU said that there wasn't enough evidence to say that it would disrupt the educational environment. Of course, that was just the district court judge, and I think it's on appeal, so there may be a final ruling that's different. But kids in school do have a First Amendment right to express themselves as long as they don't disrupt the educational environment. That's basically the rule from the Supreme Court. So that's the answer to the first question I had. Let me see if I have any other questions here for me to answer. I'm a little worried. I've been thinking that if I don't get enough questions, then I'm not going to have... Let me see here. I need some questions here from the viewers here to answer if I'm going to continue broadcasting here. Let me see if I can... I have a question from Alan Kreider asking, CISPA is back and my otherwise reasonable congressman actually voted for it. Do you know why it has any appeal at all and why it keeps coming back? Well, thank you for the question, Alan Kreider. CISPA, for those who don't know, is just passed the House of Representatives about a week or so ago. And it's a law that allows the government and other entities to get a hold of your online history, your online browsing history, where you go online, and all sorts of private information that ISPs record about you. The government can get that without a subpoena, without reasonable suspicion. They can just collect it under CISPA, and it's justified to prevent cyber attacks. And I think it's a really bad bill, and the reason that people vote for it is, a free internet is not something that is in the interest of a lot of corporations. There are a lot of special interests that are in support of CISPA, and the only way, what we have to do is what happened with SOPA. You remember SOPA and PIPA back around about a little over a year ago, New Year's from 2011 to 2012, right around that time. There was all the SOPA and PIPA activism that finally got that killed, and basically we have to have this is the age of the internet, and we need to get activists fighting it. It's passed the House, but now it's in the Senate, and of course President Obama gave a veto threat back last week that there was so much news about the Boston Marathon bombing that it may, both the passage of CISPA and President Obama's veto threat may have not gotten a lot of coverage, so maybe a lot of people didn't hear about that. But at least that's a good sign, although I'm a little skeptical because Obama also said he'd veto the Citizen Indefinite Detention Clause in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and then ended up kind of caving on that. So I'm a little worried about trusting for an Obama veto for CISPA. So I think we do need activism, grassroots online activism to prevent CISPA from making it through the Senate. One thing we have working, or one thing that opponents of CISPA have working in their favor, is that it's really difficult to get things through the Senate. There's a lot of ways, the Republicans have made it so that almost everything needs 60 votes to get through the Senate, although every now and then things that the big corporations favor or that moneyed interests favor, like the partial repeal of the Stock Act that let congressional aides trade on inside information. The Daily Show did sort of a devastating piece on that recently, and for those who haven't heard about that, that's last year there was this act passed, the Stock Act, that stopped members of Congress and their aides and people in the executive branch from trading on inside information, because previously they've been exempt from inside trader laws because they handle all this legislation about banking and finance that they can make a lot of money on. And last year, the Stock Act was passed that said that members of Congress and their aides and high officials in the executive branch wouldn't be able to trade on that information anymore. And really quickly, like a week ago, in the middle of all this news coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing, Congress passed a partial repeal of the Stock Act, that let congressional staffers trade on insider information, and the reasons for it were pretty bogus. So anyway, that was kind of a long answer to, and went off on a tangent there, but let me see. Eric Lang also asked me to talk about CISPA since they tried to sneak it past the people. Well, I've talked about CISPA a couple times, and LiberalViewer Network also asked me to talk about CISPA. And like I said, one good thing about CISPA is that it's in the Senate now, and the Senate takes a long time usually to act on things, so we can only hope that there will be enough time for the online community to do what they did with SOPA and PIPA. And anyway, Riekert Sraffs asks, any plans to do more debates with Polypop Network? Well, the Polypop Network hasn't been hosting debates since the elections, I don't think, and I don't know exactly how much effort Maker Studios has been putting into the Polypop Network lately, but I'd certainly be willing to participate in another debate if the Polypop Network were to put it on. But I probably shouldn't say any more than that about Maker Studios and the Polypop Network. So let me refresh here. I think we have a few more questions. The Mr. Raza says, this isn't a question, but I just wanted to let you know that I really like the class you bring to this site. Oh, well, that was a nice comment. Painful Mass asks, question, is this where I ask a question if I have one? Okay. And then LiberalViewer Network asks a second question, what will it take for Congress to walk the walk over immigration reform and not just hypocritically talk in favor of it? Well, a lot of things have been dying in Congress. It was pretty sad. Hold on, I have to pull a little Marco Rubio here. Talking too long, needed to take a drink, but I was really disappointed to see gun control legislation of all kinds die in the U.S. Senate in the middle of this whole Boston Marathon bombing issue. But I think the one thing that still may have a chance to pass through the Congress is the comprehensive immigration reform. And the Boston Marathon bombing has, Chuck Grassley, one of the Republican senators, has said that maybe we shouldn't go so quickly with comprehensive immigration reform, given that both the suspects in the Boston Marathon bombing were immigrants, and but other people have refuted that. I noticed New York Senator Chuck Schumer made a statement that comprehensive immigration reform would actually make us safer. It would put all these extra requirements on people to register, and we know where people are, and there'd be a lot more stringent requirements on visas, so we'd know when people overstayed their visas. And so, if anything, comprehensive immigration reform would increase U.S. security. But I think because basically the Latino vote is important to the Republican Party, and they keep looking at the numbers from the 2012 election and how it was basically impossible for Romney to win with the percentage of the Latino vote that he got. I think that's the reason that comprehensive immigration reform has a better chance of passing than all these other things that are dying in the Congress. So the fact that two immigrants, one who took advantage of a path to citizenship, are the suspects in the Boston Marathon bombing, I think may be a hiccup in the road to comprehensive immigration reform, but I do still think that it's going to happen. Of all the things, I'm getting more skeptical about some grand bargain happening on the budget where there's a reform in entitlements and a reform and some increase in taxes on the rich. I've said in previous Liberal Viewer Wednesday episodes that I think that's going to happen, and I do still think that's going to happen, but the chances of it happening are decreasing all the time. But the one thing I think has the most chance of passing is comprehensive immigration reform in some form or other, because I don't think the Republican Party wants to go into the 2014 congressional elections having blocked comprehensive immigration reform with all the problems they're having with the Latino vote in the 2012 election. So it looks like I'm getting more viewers. I'm glad to see. And I have a bunch more questions here. Let me do another Marco Rubio here and take another quick drink. Phil Przeski asks, what books do you recommend and what are you currently reading? Well, one of my worst answers to any question in Liberal Viewer Wednesday was when I tried to answer the question, what are your favorite books, I think. And I've contemplated why that was, even though I'm sitting here with a whole bookcase behind me. And it's really because I don't read a lot of books these days. I used to. When I was in school, I used to, I thought that school was kind of boring. I'm talking like the K through 12, like elementary, secondary, and high school years. I read like a book a day back in those years because what was going on in school was pretty boring to me. But these days, I read a lot of periodicals and online news information because of what I'm trying to do on this Liberal Viewer channel. I feel I have to keep current with current events, but I don't actually have a lot of time for book reading. I can show you some good books. I think I showed you a few good books that I've read behind me. But I mentioned when I tried to answer that question about what my favorite books are, or I mentioned Stephen King, who I actually do really like. I have one of the books I'm waiting to read is his book on the Kennedy assassination. I think it's 1962, and that's the kind of thing that when I finally get a chance to read a book, it's usually when I'm flying on an airplane somewhere, and I'll read, kind of like a pop fiction novel. I've read some good nonfiction books, and they're like back behind me. Let me see, are there any good books I've read back here? Anything by Robert J. Lifton. He wrote this great book, The Nazi Doctors. Here, I can bring that forward from the bookcase here. If anyone wants to understand how normal people would get involved in atrocities, that book talks about how the medical profession in the Third Reich became part of obviously one of the worst atrocities in human history, and that's a great book. Robert J. Lifton's written a bunch of great nonfiction books, but that is an old book. If you want new books, like I said, I don't get between all the stuff I'm doing, I don't get a chance to read a lot of book length stuff. I read a couple of books on the Iraq War back a few years ago. What was the I can't even remember the name of that book that I read by whatever. Later, when this records and uploads to YouTube, I'll put a annotation in talking about a good book. It was not debacle. It was like some word meaning debacle or something really bad happened. Or anyway, let me look at the next question here. Nate's Love Bug says, "Old topic. What do you think of Oregon's Death with Dignity Act?" And that's a question of whether people can. It's physician-assisted suicide. It's kind of the Jack Kevorkian issue. Should people who have terminal illnesses be able to decide when they don't want to go on, especially if they're suffering a lot of pain? And I mean, I think if someone isn't suffering from depression, if they don't have some mental illness that, especially if you can show that they're suffering from a terminal illness that involves a lot of pain, they should definitely have the right to choose to end their own lives. But it's it's a difficult issue. I mean, you don't want people who are depressed committing suicide, especially with physician assisted suicide. But I do think that government shouldn't intrude on what people decide to do with their own bodies. That's why I believe that drugs should be legalized, and I believe that you have a right to decide, as long as you aren't mentally ill, you should have a right to decide when to terminate your own life. Sure, yes. Oh, let me refresh here. I think I still have a couple more questions. Painful Mass says, "I saw there were massive protests in France over same-sex marriage. Do you have comments on this?" Well, I mean, here in the United States, we think of Europe as more progressive or more liberal, and I think that's generally true, but we have to remember that there are also conservative elements. I mean, at least in the United States, we don't have a state religion. I think most European countries actually do have state religions. If I'm not mistaken, if it hasn't changed since I learned this, I believe Catholicism is France's state religion. I know that in Great Britain they have the Queen of England is also the titular head of the Church of England, and then there's the Archbishop of Canterbury with the who heads the Church of England, and we have sort of an analog of that in the United States, the Anglican Church, where I mean, it's not that surprising that there's going to be at least some conservative elements in European countries that are going to protest against a change in traditional values, even though, from what I understand, most European countries in the majority of people are more progressive than in the United States. And I heard Rhode Island is probably about to approve same-sex marriage, and that'll make 11 states in the United States, with that Supreme Court decision coming up in May or June, probably at the end of June, because the most contentious cases are announced at the end. So things, there are always going to be regressive, counter-revolutionary or whatever conservative elements that are going to try to reverse progress. But I'm not surprised that I'm surprised maybe at how many people show up to those riots or demonstrations, however you want to characterize them in France. But I'm not surprised that there are people in France who oppose progress and equality for same-sex marriage. I'm going to have to skip over a question about DRMs from Luca Lightbringer. Says, do you have an opinion on W3C's plan to add DRMs to HTML5 because of pressure from Hollywood? I'm going to look into that because one of the things I hate the most are DRMs, which is digital rights management, where where various corporate entities make it more difficult for you to use copyrighted material even in ways that you're allowed to because of exceptions to copyright law. But I don't know what W3C is or what the plan is to add DRM to HTML5, but I know HTML5 is the video program that runs YouTube videos, so I will look into that, Luca Lightbringer, but I can't answer your question now. Willie Peterson asks, what's your opinion on the two-party political system? I've talked about this a little bit before, that I think that there are advantages and disadvantages to the fact that the U.S. has a two-party system. The Electoral College is one reason that it's very difficult for a third party to really have a national presence, because it's almost impossible for a third party to win the presidency in the United States, because the Electoral College basically amplifies the votes of the two parties, and there are all sorts of other advantages that the campaign finance system and the way that how difficult it is to get on the ballot, and even in congressional campaigns, that third parties have a lot of disadvantages in the United States. Here in California, we even have this top two primary system that means third parties are almost never going to get on general election ballots. So there are a lot of disadvantages to third parties and fourth parties and fifth parties, etc. in the United States. And I think I talked about this in a previous LiberalViewer Wednesday episode, that I think that there are actually advantages and disadvantages to the two-party system. And one of the big advantages I think that people don't think about a lot is that it promotes centrism. And makes it more difficult for extremists to gain power in the United States, which is why we haven't gone really far to the left or really far to the right in times of when, when fascism was really popular and communism was popular in Europe in the 30s and 40s and 50s. The United States didn't really have popular. In the 30s, the Socialist Party, I think, got 10-12%. I may be misremembering. Eugene Debs was the most successful socialist party in the United States, and there was no chance he would ever win the presidency, even in the depths of the Great Depression. And fascism also never really had a chance in the United States, although there were certainly fascist elements. I'm, in a way, because of some of the really nasty effects of both fascism and communism in Europe, I'm glad that the U.S. political system promotes centrism, so that extremists have great difficulty obtaining national power or even power in Congress. Unlike the parliamentary system, where you can get a very small percentage of the vote and still have, a few members, and that can be a foothold where you gain power. And that's like how Hitler came to power in Weimar Germany in a democracy, because of the parliamentary system that allows more extremist parties to have seats and eventually gain power. And so I think it's kind of good that, in a way, that the U.S. system promotes centrism, even though that center in the United States has been moving more to the right over time. And that is a little disturbing, that there is no true left in the United States, at least not with any political power, but also the extremist right has difficulty gaining political power, so there are advantages and disadvantages. NO8549 asks, how was the Root Strike conference? Well, I'm sorry to say I didn't end up going, although I planned to watch the video. There are a variety of reasons I couldn't go. I mentioned having this cold, and I wanted to make another video on the Boston Marathon bombing suspects' Miranda rights, which I kept having to change and put off because it was a developing story, and I had to make it on Saturday, which was the same time as the Root Striker conference. And because I'd been sick, especially, I didn't want to do the 2-hour drive to San Francisco and the 2-hour drive back, which were cars going over these hills that always tends to mess up my sinuses and my eustachian tubes. So yeah, I skipped the Root Striker conference, although I really wanted to go. I think I have time for maybe one more question. Let me see if CM Knoll 3 asks, I'm a big fan of your critical analyses of news media, particularly Fox News, obviously. It makes me wonder, what do you think of Sorkin's HBO show Newsroom and the theme of journalistic responsibility? Well, I really liked the first season of Newsroom. I mean, some of the stuff was kind of simplified, and but I like the idea of pretending to show a developing story and the surprise elements of a story looking back in time. And I think the next season they're going to do the same thing where they follow developing stories, but it's like a year in the past, pretending like it's a current story. And I really like going back and analyzing the way stories were covered that we're not really thinking about now, because we're focused on these current events and what's happening now. So I think that's a really innovative, insightful way to approach stuff. And I mean, I guess some people complain it's a little preachy, but I've really enjoyed the show, and I've been a big fan of Aaron Sorkin for a long time. I made a couple videos. I think I made a video about one of the Aaron Sorkin shows that got canceled that was pretty disappointing. So I'm looking forward to the next season of Newsroom, and I hope that journalists are watching it and they're getting shamed into having a more ethical perspective, or being more ethical in the way they coverage news. And it's one thing I would hope is that it takes on the entire media establishment and not just some of the right-wing stuff. And that's one of the things I've been hoping to do more with my channel. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining me for Liberal Viewer Wednesday once again. I'm going to be doing another episode of my Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup this Sunday. That's at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, where I choose 3 or 4 clips from the Sunday shows or from some of the more recent shows, and I play the clips and I give my commentary on them, and then I take live viewer questions discussing them. I hope you'll join me for that, and that you'll join me next Wednesday for Liberal Viewer Wednesday Live, and have a good rest of your week.